Hi, everybody. Let me know if you can hear me. Great, great, great. Hey, so nice to be here, I have to say. My name's Kalimah Redd Knight, and I am the president of the League of Women for Community Service. We are one of the oldest Black, continuously running Black women service clubs in the United States. And I have to say, I'm so happy to be on your program roster for the summer to talk about our stories, how to preserve them, and just to talk about the legacy of the League. We're going to cover a lot of ground today. We'll start with the early roots of the League, some of our more recent activities, a quick overview of the building that we own, also to the highlights of the collection, and we'll touch. Um, so some quick information about myself. So I grew up in Roxbury, Dorchester, right off of Humboldt, and my parents were very intentional about living in the community. They very much wanted to invest in this community. My mother is a New Yorker, and my mother came to Boston to go to college, and my father was a native Bostonian. And he's like a lot of people in his generation. He was very inspired by Alex Haley's roots. So he researched our ancestry. And we grew up very proud of our heritage and, just understanding the importance of Black history. So I'm a Boston Public School graduate. I graduated from Boston Latin School. Very proud. Hampton University alum, go HBCUs. And I was introduced to the League in 2004 when my great aunt Shirley voluntold me and my sister that we were going to join this organization. So I was on the board for a few years, and then I ended up stepping down. But in 2020, we were going through a racial reckoning, and I was really trying to figure out what to do. Could I do something more besides be out in the streets protesting? I wanted to do something that I felt like would be more lasting. And so I was recruited back to be on the board. And that was in 2021. I was elected president in 2022. And it's been virtually nonstop ever since then. I think, my background is journalism. I work in higher education where I've been for almost 20 years. And, a lot of my work has nothing to do with what I do now for the League, but it's just like what you all are doing at the Ujima project, where you see a problem, you have an idea, you work with other people and you have a passion to get it done. And it's become something that has really given me a lot of purpose and something I really enjoyed. So I've become a dedicated preservationist. So now to the League. So oftentimes when I'm introducing myself, I often ask people who's heard of the League. So has anyone ever heard of the League of Women for Community Service? Okay, there you go. So usually I go in room and nobody knows what I'm talking about. So when I explain what the League is, I often say that the League is a bridge to history. It is a bridge to the abolition movement, and it is a bridge to the suffrage movement. And it's a combination of two unique civil rights movements joined into one. But to really understand the League, you kind of have to go back. The League was founded in 1919, but you have to go back to the 1800s to really understand what it's about. Okay, so many people think of Boston as the birthplace of the Revolutionary War, and Boston truly is a national site for a lot of social progress. It really was a hotbed for abolition back in the day. And abolition movement was really comprised of a multiracial, effort to try to dismantle the institution of slavery. But it was centered by a very small but very influential group of African Americans. So one of the many women at the heart of this movement in Boston was this woman, Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin. She was born in 1842 in Beacon Hill, and she and her husband, George Ruffin, were among the people that recruited soldiers for the 54th, the 55th, and the Massachusetts 5th Cavalry, which were all Black regiments. And those regiments really changed the tide of the Civil War. They really basically had a huge impact about if the South was going to win or the North. And their impact on this huge conflict cannot be understated. So she and her husband were both instrumental in putting together this army. And her husband is actually famous in his own right. He was the first Black man to graduate from Harvard Law. and he became the first Black municipal judge in Massachusetts and possibly even the country. But Josephine was an exceptional person. So in addition to fighting for civil rights, she was a very prominent suffragist. And she was friends with very famous women in the area like Lucy Stone or Julia Ward Howe. But this was a period in the late 19th century when women's clubs became very popular. And this was a place where women organized, they mobilized, they educated, and they advocated. So there was also racism in these groups, so a lot of Black women ended up forming their own organizations. And it's worth saying that Massachusetts did have an integrated women's club. But Josephine was a really special leader. She had a very unique and powerful perspective because she was looking at these two huge liberation movements trying to advance racial betterment, but also raising rights for women. And if you want to call it intersectionality or human rights, she was a champion of this position. And you know, in the late 1800s, she literally had a phrase, all rights for all. So she was sort of a pioneer ahead of her time, knowing that if you support the rights of Black women, everybody rises and everybody has the rights that they're due in this country. I'm going to play a little video for you just to give you some background on the Black Women's Club movement and what it was all about.
Black women began organizing to force our country to live up to its ideals from the time of its founding. During Reconstruction, a new generation picked up the mantle, expanded their mission, and by the last decade of the century, their well-known slogan captured the communal spirit of the women's club movement, lifting as we climb.
By the end of the 19th century, African American women, as part of the club movement, were fighting against all of the injustices that African Americans were experiencing. But one of the most important issues that they worked on was anti-lynching.
In the 1890s, the pioneering investigative journalist Ida B. Wells lectured widely through the British Isles, shining a light on the horrifying injustices that Black Americans were suffering under Jim Crow.
There were prominent men who opposed what she did. A woman talking so frankly, they thought it was unfeminine, they thought it was problematic. And so when she was getting flack from men, it was the women's clubs that did support her.
In 1895, club women were further spurred into action when Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin received word from the secretary of the London Anti-Lynching Committee. She had received a letter from a white male journalist containing a scathing attack on the virtues of Black women. In response to Ruffin's call to action, Black women held a national conference in Boston. The following year, the National Association of Colored Women was founded with a new objective: defending the honor and the dignity of Black womanhood.
There's a lot of emphasis on ideals of womanhood that are really a response to the general degradation that Black women experienced since slavery and the depiction of Black women as lascivious and licentious. So you see lots of women who are activists sharing a notion of Black womanhood that is respectable, that is decent, that is self-respecting.
By 1920, Black women in the club movement focused on almost every area that touched upon people's lives, from housing to voting to discrimination, and leaders such as Mary Church Terrell, Fannie Berry Williams, and Mary McLeod Bethune became very active in the political arena, fighting for social justice.
Many of the women that you find in the late 19th and early 20th century who really emerge as leaders in the Black community are coming together in order to think about how to move forward, setting the tone for what will be institutional life for Black people for the coming century.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so Josephine was the co-founder of the Women's Era Club, which is the Black Women's Club that had national influence. She and her daughter, Florida Ruffin Ridley, published a newspaper, and it was published in Boston. It was the first newspaper by and for Black women right here in Boston. So she was sort of the leader of this special generation of Black women who came of age during the Reconstruction era. And these women really took advantage of this sort of like opening in the country where you had access to opportunities. They were absorbed into a national group, the Women's Era, and the self-funded newspaper eventually disbanded at the turn of the 20th century. However, its founders continued to work for a better future and confront the challenges faced by Black women who were fighting both racial and gender discrimination. So during this explosive, not quite yet, time in the country, they had their work cut out for them in an effort to realize this experiment of a multiracial democracy. So you had in 1896 the Plessy versus Ferguson case, which essentially upheld the constitutionality of racial segregation under the separate but equal doctrine. At the same time, there was a full-scale rolling back of rights achieved during Reconstruction. Here we had a groundswell of violence for the Black community, much of which was often justified, and nobody was held accountable, including sexual violence against Black women. The release of the film in 1950, The Birth of a Nation, cemented this negative narrative about the Black community as a threat, further exposing them to discrimination and violence. And that's changed. So even as these women aged, this generation stayed engaged with the movement. And a key figure among them was this woman, Mariah L. Baldwin. She was born in 1856 in Cambridge, and she was an integral part of the women's era crew. And she was extraordinary because she was an educator, she was a debater, a public speaker, a literary expert, a social activist, and she was the first president of the League. So she was also an early member of the Niagara movement, which was basically sort of the predecessor to the NAACP. And she had this group in her house called the Omar Society, where they actually analyzed literature. But her biggest claim to fame was that she was the first African-American appointed principal of an integrated public school in the Northeast. This is in 1889. So it wasn't without challenges because initially she had applied for a teaching position and she was denied, but the Black community went into an uproar and they hired her. But she was so talented, she was promoted 2 years later to be the principal. But if you can imagine how unprecedented this was, her entire faculty was white. 98% of her students were white. And all of the students were all essentially the children of Harvard professors. And she was incredible. She ran the school and she did it with so much talent. She had a very unique perspective on education. And really, she was very kind and not punitive, which was very different. And she was able to execute that way of teaching instruction masterfully. She was one of the first, if not the first person to bring in a school nurse inside the building. She really was into a different way of teaching math. She promoted arts education and she believed in outdoor education. She started a parent-teacher group, which is unheard of in the late 1800s. So she was a master educator. But even while she was so good at her job, she was also on the side cultivating Black intellectual thought. She would host students who were at Harvard. They were just allowing Black students to admission into that school, but they were very unwelcome. So Du Bois, William Monroe Trotter, they would come to her house and she would tutor them and they'd have like a literary circle together because, as I said, they really were not welcome in spaces at Harvard. So Mariah and other women were continuing to get older. So we're into the 20th century. In near retirement, but they kept engaged with the movement. So in 1918, the founders of the women's era basically reconstituted themselves. And they formed something called the Soldiers' Comfort Unit to provide support and transitional service to Black soldiers who were coming back to Boston from World War I. And the U.S. Army was segregated at the time. And so these women really saw a need and stepped up to help these men who had experienced trauma in war, only to come home to be second-class citizens. So the women really helped them get back on their feet. Next slide. So however, the next year, the women were very intentional to turn their attention from supporting the men to the women, saying the following in a membership recruitment letter that was dated June 14th, 1919. So I'm quoting the letter. So it says, like other war bodies, we are bringing our work for the soldiers to a close. All this has not entirely stopped. We are still giving dances for servicemen and are still keeping up our relationships with the Red Cross. But with the progress of demobilization, this work will gradually cease. We have decided that the immediate need of our service is with the girls. We know you realize the need for some special work for our girls in the way of aid and advice in getting rooms, opportunities for work, and pleasant gathering spaces for rest and recreation. It is just that kind of work we're planning to do. We expect in the near future to take a house so that we may better carry out our plans. So with that mandate, under the leadership of Mariah Baldwin and Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin and her daughter, Loretta Ruffin Ridley, the League officially was incorporated in 1920. That same year, the women did do just that. They did take a house, and they independently purchased 558 Massachusetts Avenue, which is a Victorian mansion at the heart of the city as its headquarters. The next slide. So the League became a hub and a nexus of art and culture in the city for the Black community, hosting lectures, exhibits, community plays, along with meetings for the local chapter of the NAACP, the United Order of Tents, as well as the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, which is also known as Pullman Porters, which is basically Amtrak was a major source of travel, and the people that serviced the train were all Black men. And they were very esteemed because they had access to the middle class with these jobs. And the South End had a huge population of Pullman porters. So the League also coordinated a whole range of social services for the surrounding communities. It was staffed by a full-time social worker, and they also hosted a lunch program. The woman built a complete library and an archive of important objects and information from the Black community. And importantly, in the 1940s and the 1950s, the League housed Black women who were coming to Boston either from the South or coming to the North to go to college, because many of the dorms were segregated at the time, and they were not welcome. They weren't officially, there wasn't a sign on the door, but they were not welcome. And oftentimes they had quotas, so there was limited space. So among those women was a young Coretta Scott when she was a student at New England Conservatory School of Music, and this is at a time where she very famously met her husband, Martin Luther King, who was a student at Boston University. So the League was a major source of pride. It was a gem in the community. It was a place of purpose where meetings and organizing place, but it also was a very celebratory place. There were tons of socials, lots of parties. It was really a place where people relaxed and felt like they were able to be themselves. And there was a place of reverence and joy. The next slide. So over the years, the League has gone through a number of transitions with the establishment of a more effective and less discriminatory social service system. The work of the League became slightly less relevant. Also, with the integration of the advance of integration and demographic changes in the area, it became more difficult for them to maintain their business model. So people may not necessarily have an event at the League when they have more options. And so also gentrification in the South End really played a role, and there's certainly a lot going on there. And so the League has been in a space of transition. Next slide. Today, however, we are sort of waging this campaign to preserve the history of the League and reimagine a new future for the organization. And we're really experiencing a renaissance. So our major priority is restoring our historic headquarters at 558 Massachusetts Ave and bringing it back online as a resource to the community, a house museum in a leasable space. So we view the site at 558 as a gem in our collection, but we also wish to preserve and make more accessible our historically significant collection, hundreds of artifacts, papers, books, historic memorabilia, which are now housed at Simmons University in Boston. So the archive offers a very unique view of American history through the lens of Black women who were fighting for justice, serving as a vital resource for education and inspiration. And we also want to expand our public educational programming and services, but the success of the organization really depends on our ability to restore the building in this way. The next slide. So far we've raised more than $2 million of a more than $5 million, $5 million that we need to restore the building. And we're actively seeking support to complete the project. So here are some of our grant funders, and we received our largest grant to date last year from the CPA, which is $711,000. Next slide. So in recent years, we've really focused on expanding our education and cultural outreach. We host talks like this to educate the community about the history of the League and our efforts to bring back the building. For more than 2 decades, the League has offered a mentoring program that includes a newly named scholarship, the Sarah Ann Shaw and Mariah L. Baldwin Scholarship, in honor of 2 Boston icons. The annual unrestricted scholarships are about $500 to $1,000 per student, and this year was very special. We had 3 students, one going to Coppin State, one going to Yale, and one going to Framingham State. We also had a wonderful Women's History Month event last March at the Boston Athenaeum with Dr. Kelly Carter Jackson. She's the author of an amazing book called We Refuse, A Forceful History of Black Resistance. If you haven't read that book, I strongly encourage you to read it. Next slide. In terms of traditional social media, we have remained active. We were featured in Historic New England last fall. The Q&A sort of focused on our restoration update. We were also in the Bay State Banner earlier this year. In terms of social, we've transitioned to Blue Sky this year for obvious reasons. And we've continued our tradition of posting content, especially during Black and Women's History Month. So please be sure to follow us on LWCS Boston. Next slide. So we're continuing our community service work during Thanksgiving. We provide food baskets to families in need at the Sportsman's Enrichment Tennis Center in Dorchester. We also participated in the Chester Square Neighborhood Association Festival, where we shared a pictorial display of some of our archives, and this year was really great. It was very special. We had a band come and they sang sort of civil rights songs, so it was a very special moment. Next slide. So in terms of fundraising, we have a lot of work cut out for us, but we've been very active. This year we hosted 2 runners who raised collectively about $7,000 for the Boston Marathon. We also do like a holiday drive, and that's been pretty successful. Next slide. But most importantly, we're continuing to make organizational investments. We've kind of been on this journey to really strengthen our financial infrastructure and taken a lot of steps in order to reach that goal. Last year, we reestablished our 501c3, and we hired a consultant to update our finances, including prep for financial review, automating cash flow and QuickBooks. And this year, we brought on a bookkeeper. And this month, we did a full financial review that was completed by our accountants and approved by the board. And this is a big milestone for us and something we're very, very proud of. We're also working on a roadmap for the future. We've been partnering with a consultant to develop a strategic plan and boost fundraising strategy for our restoration and our ongoing operations. And lastly, we have a new board member who works for the Boston Landmark Commission, which we're very excited about. Next slide. Okay, so turning to the headquarters at 558 Mass Avenue. The building was originally built in 1857 as a home to a gentleman named William R. Carnes, who was a very wealthy wood importer of fine wood. The building was really used to showcase his work, and it was sold to a gentleman named Nathaniel Farwell in 1868 after Carnes was bankrupt. A lot of people did not fare well after the Civil War, and Carnes was one of them. So the building is significant for its Victorian era architecture. Since its construction, there have been very few alterations made, which is extreme rarity for the South End. Most of those buildings have been chopped up. Next slide. So the interior of the building is remarkably intact. The spaces consist of large rooms with soaring ceilings, elaborate woodwork, carved marble fireplaces, gilt frame mirrors imported from Paris, a monumental staircase, which is solid mahogany, leading to the second floor with Corinthian columns and wall-sized mirrors. It's topped with a skylight at the very top floor and has an ornamental painted glass laying beneath the natural light. So I'll show you a picture of that in a little while. It also features gilt bronze chandeliers, original kitchen apparatus in the basement, bell pulls, door, it just goes on and on. So it's a really, really spectacular building. Next slide. So like all the houses, and this is the picture of the skylight at the very top. So like all the houses in the square has 4 floors with a basement, and a 5th level billiard room with a breathtaking 180-degree view of Boston. So here's the beautiful but damaged stained glass at the top of the top floor ceiling. Next slide. Here are just some more images in detail of the house. The craftsmanship in the space is pretty remarkable. There's a lot of customized pieces. The one on the left side, that's in a fireplace, and those are said to be the owner's children, all carved into the fireplace. Next slide. Okay, so this is the interior images. This is a newel post, and this is said to be the owner's dog, who is an Irish setter. And these marble fireplaces are all imported from Italy. And the gilded mirrors right here, they were priced at $10,000 in 1857. So it's very, very luxurious. Next slide. So the building has always been, I think, the main attraction for the League. However, the collection, which was quietly hidden in the building in closets and drawers for decades, has kind of been emerging as a star player. I always say, just imagine what your grandmother's attic looked like. That was kind of the League. All of this stuff was just in the building. And so, you know, it really is a very unique collection, because it really is through the lens of the Black women who own the space and organized the, who basically ran the organization, who were fighting for justice for all people. And so you really get a sense about what they were thinking by the things that they actively collected. And so, as I said, the collection was taken out of the building maybe 2.5 years ago, and is now housed at Simmons, and it includes a range of options: letters, minutes, ledgers, photographs, ephemera, rare books, and magazines. So the key here is that the League was able to retain ownership of the collection, and that's very rare for an organization to be able to do that. And that's also something we're very proud of. The next slide. Okay, so this is the marquee piece in our collection. It's a book of personal war stories from the surviving members of the 54th, the 55th, and the 5th Massachusetts Cavalry, all Black men. So the stories were told to a woman named Pauline Hopkins, who herself was a literary icon, playwright, magazine publisher, novelist. And the book really tells their stories. They talk about where they were from, what battles they fought, and who they were under the command of. And it really is a primary source document that includes stories that, as far as we know, haven't been seen outside of the League. Next slide. So here's just an excerpt from one of the stories from the men. It's from a gentleman named E. George Biddle, and I'll just read a little bit of it. So it says, let's see, he tells of some very interesting experiences of his during the various encounters. In one of his skirmishes, he tells of his company members that was praying on the field in the dark, the Confederate war firing by sound, and this man was praying so loud that Comrade Biddle crawled over and told him not to pray so loud, or that he would get shot. But he prayed so loud that Comrade Biddle had to slide away from him, and he had not gone far when a shot stopped him from praying. So it's so haunting. I've read that so many times, and you know, you just think about, these were like young men in this violent battle, and they were literally fighting for their lives. And they were in all these very peculiar situations, just trying to make it. And the fact that we have some of their stories is very profound. So luckily we were able to have this preserved, because there was a point where the ink was literally disappearing. So these are just very unique spaces. So next slide. Okay, so we heard about Ida B. Wells in the video earlier, and her work was really about going to the South and investigating and documenting these atrocities that were happening, you know, men and some women being lynched. And she would basically do these incredibly exhaustive compilation of stories to explain exactly what happened, and she would have it printed. It was kind of like the social media of the time. So she would go and then make all these prints, and people would share it, and people would have a sense about what was happening in order to advocate and empower people to continue to fight for their rights. And so we have a copy of this pamphlet, The Southern Horrors, and this is on the internet. But what is unique is that there are only 4 of these copies left, and the League happens to own one of them. And it's very special and very unique. And we also have original copies of the Women's Era newspaper. And I love this slide because it really demonstrates how these women were working together. The women of the League were really inspired by the work of Ida B. Wells and really sort of having her back and supporting the work that she was doing. And it really just shows just the courage of these women to speak up, to speak truth to power, to hold people to account. And I just can't imagine the level of fearlessness it takes to be able to put your name on a story that is condemning an act of violence against a group that was being so marginalized as the Black community. So I just think that collectively, you just shows how powerful one's voice can be if you're able to amplify it. Next slide. Okay, so this same pattern of speaking truth to power carried over when the League was established. And here's just an example just to show you in our collection about what the women were doing at the League. And so I kind of have to give some context. So it looks like Florida, but it's Florida. And at the time, this gentleman on the left, on the bottom, his name was Walter E. Cohen, and he was from New Orleans. His father happened to be Jewish. You know, Louisiana, there was a lot of mixing. And so he was appointed comptroller of New Orleans in like 1924, but his appointment was held up because of his race. And so a new president comes in, I think it's Calvin Coolidge, and basically rallies senators just to push it through. And so one of the senators that helped push it through is this gentleman, David I. Walsh, who was the first Irish American senator in Massachusetts. And so the way we know this is that we have a copy of the letter that was sent to Walsh, and we have the copy of the letter that Walsh sent back to the League. So Florida writes in this letter to Walsh. Okay. So she says, in voting for Cohen, not only have you performed an act worthy of a son of Massachusetts, but in doing it, you have helped rebuke the short-sightedness, the bitterness, the cowardice of those who would deny opportunities based on race and color. A party is fortunate in having such a man, and the only hope for the future of America lies in putting into leadership men and women who refuse to be party slaves, who do not stifle the voice of conscious men and women, who can aim straight and have the courage to walk even under great temptation. We are proud to claim you as a representative of the people. And you really just see her pointed language. She's talking about rebuking cowards and pitiful souls, and the future of the country depends on leaders who walk with courage. You know, if you want to think of feminine, that's not what you would think as feminine. She did not hold any punches, and she was very, very clear and direct, and didn't hesitate to share her opinion. And to his credit, he picked up what she put down. And so this is his response. So he says, while I take no special credit for voting for Mr. Cohen's confirmation, I was only doing my duty and what was just. It gratifies me to know that as many people in Massachusetts support my action, I would be lacking in true Americanism if I conscientiously discriminated against any man because of his race. March 28th, 1924. So you see the exchange, and you see how she was using her American rights to advocate for a better system, and how her representative was responding. And he also wasn't a fool, because he knew that the League basically organized a very solid voting bloc. So he was basically being a good politician in responding to their interest to also help himself stay elected. The next slide. Okay, so this item is from our collection, and for me, it really represents the human side of these incredible women. And I always think it's important not to overly romanticize history, because Mariah Baldwin was incredible, but she also went through a lot of hardships in her life. And back then, if you were a woman and you had a job as a teacher, or uniquely for her, she was a principal, if you got married and wanted a family, you couldn't work. I think that rule actually changed in like 1950s, but the reality was very challenging. And so she had, she was never known to be in a relationship. And then in 1905, her younger brother went bankrupt, and because his name was on their house, she lost this house that she had been hosting all of these luminaries at. and she had to go and live in a rooming house called Franklin Square, which actually still exists in the South End. And they were not very nice to her there. They tried to get her kicked out several times. So it was challenging. And then also, she was giving a speech in 1922, and right after the speech, she dropped dead from a massive heart attack. So I just think, oh man, she never rested. She kept working. And so when she died, her school, which she had retired from, created this like beautiful memorial in dedication to her. And I just love this story because they really talk about what kind of person she was. And they tell, there's like poems in it and little remembrances, but there's this one little story. And so basically the story is that, she was a proponent of outdoor education, and she walks outside and these kids are having like a reading. And then as soon as she walks outside, all the kids run and scatter. And so she's trying to figure out what's going on, but there's one kid who's really quiet and apparently doesn't move. And she sort of makes this assumption that the kid was the one who was responsible for the disruption. So I'll read what it says. So Miss Baldwin received the impression that this boy was the cause of the disturbance and gave him a severe lecture, which the boy bravely listened to without a word of denial. After school, the teacher explained the circumstance to Miss Baldwin. She, much distressed at the apparent injustice, came into the room the next morning and apologized to that boy before the whole class for her mistake. She told him she admired him for the way in which he had borne her unjust criticism. From that day, Miss Baldwin and that boy were the best of friends, mutually respecting each other. I believe that nothing could persuade that boy to do anything after that to lose Miss Baldwin's good opinion of him. And it's just a little short story. I just think it's so sweet writing there where she talks about her thought process, but you kind of feel like you know who she is just from that story. Her humility, how she was so committed to fairness, how she respected all people, especially children. That thing that educators do, or like a grandparent or aunt who sees a kid doing something good and is able to compliment them as a way to motivate them. She just had this quality about her, and everyone just talked about how kind she was. And I just imagine, how was she able to do that under the circumstances of dealing with all white parents all the time? That must not have been an easy situation, but she sort of figured out her lane, and she sort of did it in a very masterful and wonderful way. So I just am sort of marveling about her ability to negotiate and navigate that era in a position of leadership the way she did, and how she excelled. And ironically, if you notice, this is the name of the school, the Agassiz School. And if you know anything about scientific racism, Louis Agassiz was one of the main promoters of scientific racism. And she basically was affiliated with the school for 40 years. And ironically, they actually named the school after her in 2002. So it's just very poetic justice there. Okay, so next slide. So this is just some records of young Coretta Scott when she was at the league. We happen to have her wedding invitation, so she must have been keeping in touch with someone at the league. I just randomly found it there. And a lot of people, if they know of the league, they know of it because she was there. But I wanted to put her in just because people don't realize someone who was a hero that you may love, like your grandmother. But have you ever thought of why your grandmother is as wonderful, or why you love her? You always think about the people who are your heroes. And I don't think people realize that there's generations and generations, especially of the Black community, that sacrifice to get the community where it is. And she really stood on the shoulders of all these women who made sure she had a home, made sure she had a safe space to be herself while she was here in Boston. And I just think that that's really what the League represents, this whole legion of women who basically were very practical, very smart, who made a way for dozens of women to be able to excel. And she benefited. And what did she do? She worked with a partner who was able to open up the country for everyone. And I think a lot of people don't know a lot about, she was actually a really gifted singer, and she would do concerts to raise money for the civil rights movement and really finance a lot of the work that they were doing. So she doesn't get enough credit, but anyway, we have a lot of stuff, a few things about Coretta. Next slide. Okay, so these are just some photos. We have a bunch of like beautiful black and white photos of the South End. Back in the day, people thought you could cure tuberculosis by cleaning up your yard. So they had these contests where they would take before and after pictures, and they're just these beautiful images of the community. I mean, the South End was almost completely was an immigrant community, but there was a time when it was transitioned to a Black community, and so um, they had parades, they had picnics, and this contest was done every year. They would get like $12 prize. So it was a really big fun deal. So we have tons and tons of beautiful photos of this contest and all the activities that happened there. Next slide. And this is just some pictures that were taken inside and outside of the building. So this is the Alphas. This is actually the Black fraternity where Martin Luther King, when he was a student here, basically became an Alpha. They did a lot of events to support and celebrate the seniors, and they did a lot of plays. Next slide. So next on the horizon, we are continuing to fundraise to complete the building. We want to make it into a house museum, a leasable space for events, and also, possibly some office space for like-minded organizations. We're really focusing on the internal structure of the organization to really modernize it. We want to do sort of a Friends of the League so people can, participate and not be on the board level. And we're also looking at potentially going after national historic designation. When the building is done, we really want it to be a vibrant community hub that will support a range of activities for people from all backgrounds and really serve as kind of a cultural nexus and really celebrate the rich heritage of the city, offering opportunities for all people of all abilities, all sexual and gender identities, backgrounds, ages to learn and connect with one another. So that's really the vision, and it's really based on the early roots of the women's era that really focused on all rights for all, giving people a space to be themselves and enjoy one another's company. Next slide. So in closing, I know we've covered a lot of ground. The League is really such a special place for me. I think two things. I really am amazed at the through line of what the women started and how they continue to exist. We actually own another property in the South End where just until recently, they were still housing women of color who are coming to graduate school here. And so it's like the mission continues from early, hasn't really changed. And also, I think it's a source of inspiration, especially in times like we're in now, very strange times that feel very unsafe. I always think if these women were able to survive and achieve what they achieved, that we can do it also. And so it's a really a source of inspiration for me from a personal perspective. So that's my presentation. I'd love to take questions and thank you for your attention.
Please take the screenshots and photo of that QR code right now for Kalimah's and the League resources, as I will be stop sharing screen in just a few seconds. We have some time to take questions and answers. Our priorities are going to be with our online audience, of which we already have one question from Nia Evans. Nia from the Boston Ujima Project, Executive Director. Where'd your question go, Nia?
Oh, thanks, Gio. I thought you were going to read it, but I asked, is the League currently a membership organization?
Yes, that's a great question. So right now, we've had a lot of things we've had to focus on. So we've focused on 501c3. We've focused on revamping our finances. We've focused on programs. We've focused on getting our social media. So we really wanted to take care of the fundamentals of the organization before we start growing. I think that was one of my biggest goals, is to make sure we somehow maintain the integrity of the organization. We are basically moving to the next phase, and that will be sort of focusing on how we structure membership. A lot of people don't really do women's clubs, so we have to basically repot ourselves to make ourselves relevant to the community. And so we're in the process of doing that right now with our consultants. So we are getting to the point where we're going to be opening up to membership. So that would allow people to have maybe greater access to lease the space, involved with all of our programming and then help us sort of move forward in the direction of the organization. So long answer, but we're getting there. We're getting to a place where we're going to be inviting members.
Thank you. I can't wait to join. It makes sense that you're taking steps to prepare, but I can't wait to join.
Thank you for saying that. I appreciate that.
Excellent. And right now, we're going to have to make an Ujima decision in the spirit of co-creation through learning. You can continue the Q&A with folks that have time for that. And then, actually, how's that going to work? You got in-person people too. Yeah. And it's because we have the publications team meeting at 7:15 p.m. And we do want to honor their member team meeting time. So you think we can do 5
Please
more
have
minutes?
one more question, please.
Okay. All right. We can do 5 more minutes. Shout out to Alula and Publications for your patience. Thank you to the other member team folks that are here. Let's do 5 more minutes. And Tamashi, you have a question.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Nia, for making sure that I got here. Thank you, Ujima, for being such a modern embodiment of what I've learned about this history coming in late. Thank you so much, Kalimah, for this presentation. So my question is, in the imagined reconstruction of the building, given that the original space housed visual and performing arts enrichment for audiences and artists through performances and exhibitions, will the restored space prioritize facilities space for this purpose as well? And if so, would the league consider reserving some space for a limited number of visual artist studios and performance rehearsal space? Since the consumption of the arts for audiences is one aspect of creative productivity, but being that the league prioritized the archives and libraries, I feel it's important to prioritize spaces for people to make and not just be seen. Yeah, and there's like an ongoing crisis with affordable art spaces for visual artists to work. I'm in that crisis right now, actually. And yeah, just wondering if the league is considering restoring that part of their legacy for facilitating access to and creation of the visual and performing arts.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the DNA of the league. They were really about arts and culture. I mean, I don't know if everyone knows Alan Crate, who is an incredible painter. He exhibited, there were so many art exhibits at the league. James Weldon Johnson, who wrote Lift Every Voice, would lecture at the league. So they were very much steeped in Black culture, because the women knew you had to do meetings, you had to do the real stuff, but they knew that there was value in arts and culture. I mean, if you go to the building, they have paintings. There was a group called the Aristo Club, which was a Black performing art group. I don't know if everyone know Maud Cuny Hare. She was an early member. She was the first woman to write a musicologist about Creole music. So that was 100% the league. So we could not separate ourselves from that emphasis. And we've even thought about the skylight. Maybe that's the artist in residence place. So Chandra Ortiz, I don't know if anyone knows her. She actually lived at the league for a period. So we can't separate ourselves from that part of our past. And that's something that we're really trying to figure out as we go through this transition. How do we manage that part of our history? But that's definitely something that we plan to prioritize.
And spaces for making, not just for the showing?
So we were thinking of doing like a writer in residence or artist in residence in the top floor, and we have 4 floors, and so the bottom floor would be leasable space, the second floor would be house museum, and then we have office space, and then that sky kind of like a crow's nest for like either we're thinking an artist in residence or like a writer in residence. That's our goal.
Or both, like the McDowell Colony for artists and writers, maybe.
Susie?
So the collection, your collection's at Simmons. Are there people at Simmons?
What time, Susie?
Oh, I'm sorry. So the archives are at Simmons. Are there people at Simmons who are actively cataloging and
So they basically done like a really solid sort of the archive. I mean, these were just like, we had to like basically sit through all of this stuff and separate what can be saved and what should be saved. And we sent them about 60 banker style boxes. So they've gotten it, and they have a guide, a collection guide. We really want to continue to process it more. I mean, I could give a whole other 2 hour about the collection, because the collection is, we have a Du Bois letter, we have a Booker T. Washington letter, we have, you know, we have Ida B. Wells, we have Mary McLeod Bethune, and we have Nita Warwick, who's an incredible sculptor, and they all have projects that were at the league or letters. So we need more processing, and so we're working with them to figure out how to do that, but especially to make it digital so people can access it, you know, without damaging it, and also do some preservation on some of the items. So where our goal is to retain ownership, preservation, retain ownership, and make it public, the league and the collection.
So that's another area where you have to do grant writing, funding.
Yeah. Absolutely. But it's good for us to partner with another organization, because we don't have any staff at the league. We're all volunteer. I have another job. So we have to sort of really manage our priority list in order to move forward. But Simmons has been great. And like I said, they've allowed us to retain ownership of our collection, which is key. So we own our collection and we own our building.
Excellent. And looks like we got 2 more questions in the chat. Claudia said, how can we best support? And then just for the recording, James also had a question in the chat as well. Maybe we could reach out to each other after the fact. But James asked, this is such a community gem with such a rich history, definitely inspired. I saw you mention institutional supporters, but curious to know if the organization has had success with individual giving.
Yeah. Thank you. So you can support us by following us on social media. We're starting to get our kind of like newsletter together. So come on the website, keep up with our events. We'd love, you know, more different kinds of people from this community specifically engaged in our events. And so just be ready when we're ready to kind of be more public. And so we've had some success with foundations and smaller fundraisers. We're in a stage right now where we're really going after larger donors, just so that we can continue our momentum and finish the project. So we're working with our consultant to help us kind of form that strategy, but that's something we're actively working on, so that we can close the gap.
Excellent. And not that we want to, but it's our responsibility to end our question and answer here. Can we please give it up one more time for Kalimah and yourselves? And yourself.